The story that is being presented to you is called The Weight of the Earth. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video so that I can get some encouragement and present the best stories to you people. The morning Thomas Harrow was born, the sky above Blackwick was the color of old iron, dull, bruised, and heavy. Rain fell not in drops but in sheets, washing soot from the rooftops only to drag it into the gutters where it mixed with mud and coal dust. Blackwick was a labor town in northern England, a place where men rose before the sun and returned after dark, where hands were rough before boyhood ended, and where dreams, if they existed at all, were whispered only to oneself. Thomas's father, Edward Harrow, was already at the ironworks when the midwife knocked on the door of their narrow brick house. Edward never knew that his son entered the world screaming as if protesting it. Edward would not come home that night. A furnace explosion, quick, violent, merciless, ended his life along with 6 others. The company would call it an accident, the town would call it fate, and Margaret Harrow, holding her newborn son, would call it the moment the world demanded everything from her and offered nothing in return. Thomas grew up with that story before he could read. It lived in the tightness of his mother's mouth when money was mentioned, in the way she counted coins twice, and in how she never once spoke ill of the ironworks, even though it had swallowed her husband whole. "Anger is heavy," she told Thomas once, "heavier than coal, and it will break your back faster." Thomas learned early that weight mattered. By the age of 9, Thomas was already working, unofficially, of course. He carried water for men twice his size, cleaned tools, swept floors, and ran errands that earned him pennies and bruises in equal measure. School existed, but it was optional in Blackwick, especially for boys with empty cupboards at home. Thomas attended when he could, sitting at the back of the room, hands stained with grease, eyes sharp and restless. Numbers fascinated him, not the abstract kind, but numbers that meant something. Wages, prices, measurements, quantities. He noticed patterns others ignored. Why did iron prices rise in winter? Why did some men always seem to have work while others waited? Why did the company store charge more than the market 2 towns away? Questions stacked in his mind like ledgers waiting to be balanced. One evening, while delivering scrap metal to a small repair shop, Thomas met Mr. Lionel Beckett, a thin man with spectacles perpetually slipping down his nose. Beckett repaired clocks. "You're late," Beckett said without looking up. "I ran, but the hill—" "Time doesn't care about hills," Beckett interrupted. That sentence stayed with Thomas longer than Beckett himself. Mr. Beckett paid Thomas a penny more than others did. When Thomas asked why, Beckett replied, "Because you return what you don't use, and you ask before you touch." "What's that worth?" Thomas asked. "Trust," Beckett said. "It's rare, and therefore valuable." Beckett taught Thomas how clocks worked, not just mechanically, but economically. He explained supply and demand using broken springs and missing gears. "People don't pay for time," Beckett said one night. "They pay for certainty." Thomas absorbed everything. He learned that skill multiplied effort, that patience outperformed strength, that understanding systems mattered more than surviving within them. But Blackwick did not reward understanding. At 14, Thomas left school for good. At 15, he entered the ironworks. At 16, he nearly died. The beam fell without warning. One moment Thomas was guiding molten metal, sweat blinding him, lungs burning. The next, the world roared. Steel screamed as it bent. Men shouted. Fire leapt where it should not have been. Thomas was thrown backward, his shoulder crushed beneath falling debris. Pain erased thought. Darkness swallowed sound. He woke 2 days later in a cot that smelled of disinfectant and despair. The doctor shook his head. "You'll work again," he said, "but not like before." The ironworks offered compensation, a small payment and a handshake. Thomas accepted both. Inside, something hardened. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Recovery was slow. Pain followed him like a shadow. Heavy labor was no longer an option, not permanently, not reliably. Margaret said nothing, but Thomas saw the fear in her eyes. That fear became his fuel. He began reading obsessively, newspapers, discarded account books, shipping notices. He visited markets in nearby towns, walking miles despite the pain, observing prices, listening to merchants argue. He noticed inefficiencies, a surplus here, a shortage there. He borrowed £3 from Mr. Beckett, money that took Beckett 10 minutes of silence to agree to. "I'll repay you," Thomas said. Most debts are not money, remember. Which ones matter? Thomas began buying small quantities of iron scraps and reselling them where demand was higher. Margins were thin, risks were constant. Then something went wrong. One cold autumn evening, Thomas invested nearly all his capital into a single shipment. If it succeeded, he would double his money. If it failed, the shipment never arrived. The middleman disappeared. The documents were forged. Thomas searched for days, asked questions no one answered, knocked on doors that stayed shut. £3 gone, weeks of work erased. Margaret found him sitting at the table long after midnight, staring at nothing. "You can stop," she said gently. "There's no shame." Thomas looked at his hands, scarred, shaking, alive. "There is shame," he said quietly, "in not learning." Something about the vanished shipment troubled him, not just the loss, but the pattern. He began investigating quietly, comparing notes, listening in taverns, reading court notices. What he found disturbed him. The ironworks, the same company that killed his father, was manipulating prices by controlling supply routes. Small traders were being crushed deliberately. Thomas realized something terrifying. The game was rigged, and even more terrifying, he was beginning to understand how it worked. Most men, upon seeing the scale of the system, would retreat. Thomas did not. Instead, he made a choice that would define his life. He would learn the rules better than those who wrote them. He would not fight the system with anger. He would outgrow it with intelligence. And he would do it slowly, quietly, and relentlessly. But he did not yet know that someone had noticed him, someone powerful, someone who did not like being observed. Thomas first noticed him in the market at Leeds. The man stood near a spice stall, dressed too well for the weather, but not richly enough to draw envy. He pretended to examine cumin while his eyes tracked transactions, weights, prices, faces. Thomas felt the gaze the way one feels pressure before a storm. When Thomas turned, the man smiled politely. "Prices fluctuate strangely these days," the man said. "They always have," Thomas replied. "Yes," the man said, "but lately they're being guided." Thomas said nothing. The man nodded, satisfied. "If you ever tire of guessing currents, come find me." He slipped a card into Thomas's hand. Nathaniel Crow, Logistics and Finance. The name burned itself into Thomas's memory. Crow's office overlooked the river, a deliberate choice Thomas would later understand. Trade followed water, power followed trade. Crow spoke plainly. "The market is not chaos," he said. "It is architecture, and architecture has load-bearing points." Crow taught Thomas how large firms manipulated supply chains legally, how credit strangled small traders, how contracts were weapons disguised as paper. "This isn't villainy," Crow said. "It's optimization." Thomas listened, wary but hungry. "You're clever," Crow continued, But clever men starve unless they attach themselves to capital. And what do you get? Thomas asked. Crow smiled. Eyes and loyalty. Thomas agreed, carefully. With Crow's backing, Thomas scaled quickly. He no longer traded scraps, but bulk materials. He learned to hedge risk, to diversify routes, to negotiate insurance. He hired clerks, former laborers like himself, and paid them fairly, earning fierce loyalty. He refused bribes. He documented everything. Profits rose steadily. Margaret moved into a warm house with windows that faced the sun. She cried the first time she saw it. "You've done enough," she said. Thomas shook his head. "I've just learned how far the road goes." Crow began asking questions. Who was Thomas meeting? Why did he avoid certain contracts? Why did he keep copies of correspondence? Information is leverage, Thomas replied. Transparency is protection. Their relationship cooled. Then came the offer. Crow proposed a consolidation deal, one that would bankrupt dozens of independent traders. Legal, profitable, ruthless. Thomas saw faces behind the numbers, men like his father, boys like himself. "I won't sign," Thomas said. Crow's eyes hardened. "Then you'll be isolated." "So be it." Crow leaned closer. "You think morality shields you. It paints a target." Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. The audits came first, then accusations. Thomas was summoned before a commercial tribunal, accused of falsifying shipping records. The evidence was impeccable, forged. Crow's signature was nowhere. Thomas realized too late. Documentation protected against chaos, but not against conspiracy. His accounts were frozen. Partners fled. Friends avoided him. Margaret fell ill from stress. At night, Thomas lay awake, listening to the city breathe, wondering if integrity had been a luxury he could not afford. Ruined, but not defeated, Thomas returned to Crow's office. "I won't beg," Thomas said, "but I'll listen." Crow poured wine. "You misunderstand power. It doesn't reward goodness. It rewards usefulness." "And when you're no longer useful?" Thomas asked. Crow smiled thinly. "Then you become cautionary." Thomas looked out at the river. "Rivers don't fight stones," Thomas said. "They go around them, and in time, the stone disappears." Crow laughed. Thomas left. Thomas vanished from public trade. For 2 years, nothing was heard of him. In truth, he worked quietly, advising cooperatives, creating shared credit pools, designing contracts that protected small producers. He educated laborers on finance, teaching them to read ledgers like maps. He took no credit. He built networks. When the economy shifted, as it always did, Crow's empire, overextended and arrogant, began to crack. Thomas was ready. Crow's firms fell one by one. Supply lines failed, credit evaporated. Investigations surfaced, this time real. Thomas was summoned again, not as defendant, but as consultant. He testified calmly, factually. Crow watched from the gallery, pale and furious. Afterward, Crow confronted him. "You planned this." "No," Thomas said. "I prepared for it." "There's no difference." "There is," Thomas replied. "One destroys to win. The other builds so destruction isn't fatal." Investors approached Thomas. They offered control, titles, wealth beyond his early dreams. "You can rule differently," they said. Thomas hesitated. Power demanded compromise. Leadership demanded sacrifice. That night, Margaret spoke for the last time before passing peacefully in her sleep. "Whatever you build, make it lighter than anger." Thomas accepted, but on his terms. he created a holding company that prioritized long-term stability over short-term exploitation, profit sharing, transparent governance, worker education. Critics called him naive, competitors called him dangerous, workers called him fair. The system resisted him. The system adjusted. Success brought loneliness. Every decision displaced someone. Every compromise haunted him. He learned that greatness was not comfort, it was endurance. But he also learned this: ethical systems scaled when intelligence guided them. Years later, Thomas stood at a factory opening, not an ironworks, but a school attached to one. He spoke simply. "I began with nothing but questions," he said, "and questions, if you follow them honestly, will teach you how the world works and how to change it." The crowd applauded, but Thomas looked beyond them, toward the horizon, where rivers still carried goods and stones still thought themselves permanent. He smiled. Thomas Harrow died wealthy, but not worshipped, and that pleased him. His true inheritance was not gold or buildings, but a generation who understood that hard work alone was not enough. One must also understand the game beneath the game and choose every day what kind of player to be. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video.